The video hit social media before Thomas even arrived at the precinct the next morning. Someone in one of the neighboring mansions had captured the entire interaction on their phone, and the footage spread like wildfire through São Paulo's digital landscape. The clear audio caught every dismissive tone, every cutting remark, while the high-definition video showed Judge Vasquez's dignity in stark contrast to Thomas's aggressive posturing. Walking into the precinct felt like entering a hostile territory. Conversations died as he passed, replaced by pointed silence or whispered comments just loud enough to hear. Officers he'd worked with for years suddenly found urgent business in other directions. Even the civilian staff, usually quick with a greeting, kept their eyes fixed on their screens. "Rodriguez!" The captain's voice carried across the bullpen like a thunderclap. "Office. Now!" Thomas felt every eye in the room following him as he made his way to Silva's office. The walk seemed longer than usual, each step carrying the weight of impending consequences. Through the glass walls, he could see several senior officers already gathered inside, their expressions grave. Silva didn't wait for him to sit down. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Any concept of the shitstorm you've brought down on this department?" The captain's face had settled into the dangerous calm that veterans knew preceded his worst explosions. Judge Vasquez isn't just any judge. She's been leading the push for police reform in the state assembly. And you just handed her perfect ammunition. "Sir, I followed procedure," Thomas began, but Silva cut him off with a sharp gesture. Procedure? Was it procedure to ignore her identification? To maintain that level of aggression after she clearly identified herself? To conduct a pat-down without probable cause? Silva's voice rose with each question. "The media is having a field day. Respected judge subjected to discriminatory police stop. That's running on every major news channel right now." One of the senior officers, Lieutenant Carvalho, stepped forward. "The police union's already getting calls. They're worried this could derail negotiations for the new contract." Thomas felt the walls closing in. 15 years of service, hundreds of arrests, countless commendations, all potentially undone by 3 minutes of video. "What are my options, sir?" Silva's laugh held no humor. "Options? You'll be lucky if—" His phone buzzed, interrupting what promised to be a thorough dressing down. The captain's expression shifted as he read the message, moving from anger to something more complex. "Well, this is unexpected," Silva muttered, looking up at Thomas with renewed interest. "It seems Judge Vasquez wants to see you. Today, in her chambers." The room fell silent. Everyone present knew that a judge requesting a private meeting usually meant one of two things: either career suicide or an opportunity for redemption. Given the circumstances, Thomas suspected he knew which way this would go. The courthouse stood like a temple of justice in the heart of São Paulo, its classical architecture a reminder of the weight of law and tradition. Thomas had testified here countless times, but walking through the marble halls today felt different. Each echo of his footsteps seemed to mock him, reminding him of his fall from grace. Judge Vasquez's assistant, a young woman with efficient movements and a carefully neutral expression, led him through the outer office. "The judge will see you now," she announced, opening the heavy wooden door to the inner chambers. The office beyond matched its occupant, elegant, organized, and radiating authority. Judge Vasquez sat behind a massive desk, reviewing documents with the same composed expression she'd maintained during yesterday's encounter. She didn't look up immediately, letting Thomas stand there for a long moment before acknowledging his presence. "Officer Rodriguez," she finally yes. "Aide," setting aside her papers. "Please sit down." Thomas lowered himself into one of the leather chairs facing her desk, fighting the urge to fidget under her steady gaze. The judge studied him with the kind of attention usually reserved for examining evidence, her dark eyes missing nothing. "I've reviewed your service record," she began, tapping a thick file on her desk. 15 years on the force. Multiple commendations for bravery. Generally positive performance reviews, though there are some concerning patterns in your interaction reports. She paused, letting the implications of that last statement hang in the air. Thomas remained silent, knowing anything he said could only make things worse. You're probably expecting me to demand your badge, Judge Vasquez continued, her voice neutral. That would be the easy solution, wouldn't it? Make an example of one officer and pretend the underlying problems don't exist. The question caught Thomas off guard. He'd been preparing himself for career execution, not philosophical discussion. Instead, I'm going to offer you a choice. She leaned forward, her intensity filling the room. You can accept whatever punishment your department decides to hand down, probably a transfer to some remote precinct where you can't cause any more PR disasters. Or, she let the word hang there, heavy with possibility. Or you can help me change things. Thomas blinked, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I've been developing a program, Judge Vasquez explained, pulling a folder from her desk drawer. A comprehensive training initiative focused on addressing systemic bias in law enforcement. We have the curriculum, we have the experts, but what we've been missing is someone from inside the force. Someone who understands the reality of street-level policing, who knows firsthand how these biases develop and manifest. She slid the folder across the desk. Someone, Officer Rodriguez, like you. Thomas stared at the folder, his mind struggling to process this unexpected turn. You want me to help train other officers? After what happened? Precisely because of what happened. Judge Vasquez's expression softened slightly. Your incident wasn't unique, Officer Rodriguez. It was just caught on camera. But instead of making you a scapegoat, I'm offering you the chance to be part of the solution. The folder contained detailed plans for a training program unlike anything Thomas had seen before. It went beyond the usual sensitivity seminars and diversity workshops, diving deep into the psychology of bias, the history of discrimination in law enforcement, and practical strategies for better community interaction. Why me? The question escaped before he could stop it. Judge Vasquez's response was immediate. Because you're not a bad officer, Thomas. You're a product of a system that reinforces certain prejudices and rewards certain behaviors. But most importantly, because you're at a crossroads. Yesterday showed you the consequences of continuing down the same path. Today, I'm offering you a different direction. The weight of the decision pressed down on Thomas. The easy choice would be to take his punishment, transfer to another precinct, and continue as he always had. But something about Judge Vasquez's words resonated with a doubt that had been growing in his mind, a recognition that perhaps his approach to policing needed to change. The program starts next week, Judge Vasquez said, rising from her desk. You have until Friday to decide. Whatever choice you make, Officer Rodriguez, make sure it's one you can live with. The walk back to his car felt different this time. The courthouse's shadows seemed less threatening, its echoes less mocking. Thomas clutched the folder containing the program details, his mind already beginning to process the possibilities it represented. His phone buzzed, a message from his partner, Anna, asking about his meeting. Thomas stared at the screen, wondering how to explain this unexpected turn of events. How do you tell someone that the person you thought was about to end your career had instead offered you a chance to reinvent it? As he drove home through the darkening city streets, Thomas found himself noticing details he usually overlooked. The young woman clutching her purse tighter as he passed in his civilian clothes. The group of teenagers changing direction when they spotted his off-duty weapon. The subtle ways people reacted to his presence, shaped by experiences and assumptions he'd never fully considered. Judge Vasquez's words echoed in his mind. Make sure it's one you can live with. The choice ahead of him wasn't just about saving his career. It was about deciding what kind of officer, what kind of person he wanted to be. That evening, Thomas sat at his kitchen table, the program folder open before him like a challenge. The streetlight filtering through his window cast long shadows across the detailed curriculum pages, training schedules, and testimonials from other departments that had implemented similar initiatives. His coffee had grown cold, forgotten during hours of intense study and self-reflection. Each page seemed to peel back another layer of his professional identity. The section on historical context of law enforcement bias made him recall countless traffic stops where he'd made snap judgments based on appearance alone. The chapter titled Impact of Authority Dynamics forced him to confront his own behavior during yesterday's incident with Judge Vasquez. He'd always justified his aggressive approach as necessary for officer safety, But now he wondered how much of it was about maintaining control, about asserting dominance. His phone buzzed again. The fifth message from Anna since his meeting with the judge. She was probably worried, and rightfully so. Partners developed a special kind of bond over years of watching each other's backs. And Anna had been more than just a partner. She'd been his conscience more times than he cared to admit, gently questioning his methods when they crossed lines, suggesting alternatives when his approach grew too harsh. Thomas finally picked up the phone, but his thumb hesitated over the call button. How could he explain this to her? That the judge they'd all expected to end his career had instead offered him a chance to help reform the very system he defended so vigorously for 15 years? Anna had always been more progressive in her policing style. Would she see this as an opportunity or a betrayal? The night deepened around him as he delved further into the program materials. The section on community trust building included case studies from other cities where similar initiatives had been implemented. The results were undeniable. Precincts that adopted comprehensive bias training and community-oriented policing showed significant improvements in public trust, cooperation, and officer safety. His mind wandered back to earlier cases, viewing them through this new lens. The teenage boy he'd roughed up last month for suspicious behavior. Had that been necessary, or had he simply been operating on autopilot, falling back on ingrained prejudices? The woman he dismissed as hysterical during a domestic dispute. How might that situation have differed with a more empathetic approach? The weight of these realizations pressed down on him like a physical force. For 15 years, he prided himself on being a good cop, on following his training and protecting his community. But what if that training itself was flawed? What if the very instincts he'd relied on were shaped by biases he'd never thought to question? Around midnight, he found himself staring at his reflection in the kitchen window. The streetlight cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the lines that 15 years on the force had carved there. He barely recognized the man looking back at him, not because he'd changed, but because he was Final. Why seeing himself clearly? His service weapon sat on the table beside the folder, its presence a constant reminder of the power and responsibility he carried. How many times had he used that power without questioning why? How often had he confused authority with justice? The clock ticked past 1 in the morning as Thomas began writing in his notebook, documenting his thoughts and observations. If he was going to do this, if he was going to take Judge Vasquez's offer, he needed to understand his own journey first. How could he help other officers confront their biases if he hadn't fully confronted his own? He wrote about his first years on the force, about the veteran officers who'd shaped his approach to policing. He wrote about the subtle ways department culture reinforced certain attitudes and behaviors. He wrote about the adrenaline rush of power that came with the badge and how easy it was to mistake that power for righteousness. Dawn was breaking when Thomas finally looked up from his notebook, pages filled with the kind of honest self-examination he'd been avoiding for years. The morning light painted his kitchen in soft colors, offering a new perspective on familiar surroundings. His decision crystallized with the growing day. He would accept Judge Vasquez's offer, not just to save his career, but because it was the right thing to do. He reached for his phone, no longer hesitating. Anna deserved to know first, and he needed her perspective more than ever. As the phone rang, Thomas realized that this wasn't just about changing department procedures or implementing new training protocols. This was about fundamental transformation, personal, professional, and institutional. The city was waking up outside his window, people beginning their daily routines. Somewhere out there, other officers were starting their shifts, carrying the same biases and assumptions he'd held for so long. If Judge Vasquez's program could help even a few of them see what he was beginning to understand, maybe there was hope for real change. Anna's sleepy voice answered on the fourth ring. "Thomas? Are you okay?" He took a deep breath, ready to share his epiphany. "I'm better than okay. I think I finally understand what we've been doing wrong all these years, and I've been offered a chance to fix it." The silence on the other end of the line held both concern and curiosity. Thomas began explaining, his words carrying the weight of his night's revelations. As he spoke, the sun continued its rise over Sao Paulo, promising a new day and, perhaps, a new way forward for not just him, but for all those who wore the badge. His notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with honest reflection and hard truths. Tomorrow, he would walk into Judge Vasquez's chambers and accept her offer. But first, he needed to share this journey with the one person who had always seen the potential for something better in him, even when he couldn't see it himself. Anna, he continued, his voice steady with newfound purpose. I need to tell you about a program that could change everything. Anna's silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to make Thomas wonder if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mix of emotions he'd rarely heard from his usually composed partner. Tell me everything, she said, fully awake now. Start from the beginning. For the next hour, Thomas shared his night's revelations, his voice growing hoarse as he explained Judge Vasquez's proposal and his own journey of self-discovery. He described the program's details, his initial skepticism giving way to recognition, and the profound discomfort of confronting his own biases. Anna listened without interruption, her occasional hums of acknowledgement encouraging him to continue. You know, she finally said after he'd finished, I've been waiting 5 years for you to have this awakening. The statement caught Thomas off guard. What do you mean? Remember at domestic violence call in Piñeros? The one where you wouldn't let the victim speak because you'd already decided what happened based on the neighborhood and her appearance? Thomas winced at the memory. You're never going to let me forget that one, are you? No, because that was the day I realized my partner was a good cop trapped in a broken system. Anna's voice softened. I've watched you struggle with this for years, Thomas. You have good instincts buried under all that departmental conditioning. Maybe that's why Judge Vasquez chose you. She saw what I've been seeing. The early morning traffic began to build outside Thomas's window, the city coming alive with the promise of a new day. He found himself noting the diverse stream of people heading to work. Office workers, street vendors, students, each carrying their own stories and struggles. How many of them had been affected by officers operating under the same biases he was now confronting? I want you in on this, Anna, he said suddenly. The program needs perspectives like yours. Officers who've been trying to do things differently all along. Slow down, partner, Anna chuckled. You haven't even officially accepted the position yet. But, she paused, considering, if Judge Vasquez is open to it, I'd be interested in seeing what this program's really about. By 7 a.m., they'd agreed to meet for coffee before heading to the precinct. Thomas showered and dressed with mechanical efficiency, his mind racing with possibilities. The program folder sat in his briefcase like a compass pointing toward a new direction in his career. The local cafe was already bustling when he arrived. Anna sat at their usual corner table, 2 coffees waiting. The morning light caught the silver strands in her dark hair, evidence of 15 years dealing with Sao Paulo's worst while trying to maintain her humanity. You look like hell, she greeted him with characteristic directness. Didn't sleep, Thomas admitted, sliding into his seat. Too much to process. Anna studied him over her coffee cup. You're really serious about this, aren't you? This isn't just about saving your career? I thought it was at first, Thomas confessed. But after spending the night reading through the program materials, thinking about our years on patrol, he trailed off, searching for the right words. Anna, we've been part of the problem. Every time we've let our assumptions guide our actions. Every time we've escalated instead of de-escalated. Every time we've mistaken authority for justice. We've been reinforcing a system that needs to change. The cafe buzzed with morning activity around them. A young mother struggled to manage her children while ordering coffee. Thomas noticed how the other patrons gave his uniform a wide berth, their body language shifting subtly as they registered his presence. These were the small details he'd always ignored, the daily demonstrations of the divide between police and community. The program isn't just about sensitivity training or diversity workshops, he continued, pulling out the folder. It's about fundamentally rethinking how we approach our role in the community. Look at this section on community-based policing initiatives. For the next hour, they pored over the materials together. Anna's questions were incisive, drawing on her years of experience, trying to balance effective law enforcement with community trust. She pointed out potential challenges, suggested modifications based on her street-level knowledge, and gradually became as invested in the program's possibilities as Thomas. This could actually work, she finally said, sitting back with a thoughtful expression. If, and this is a big if, you can get the old guard to buy in. You know how resistant some of our colleagues are to change. Thomas nodded, remembering the hostile silence that had greeted him in the precinct yesterday. That's why we need officers like you involved. Officers who all read. Why understand the need for change, but also understand the realities of the job. Their phones buzzed simultaneously, the daily shift notification. Reality was calling, reminding them that regardless of last night's epiphanies and this morning's plans, they still had a job to do. As they walked to their patrol car, Thomas found himself viewing the morning street scene differently. Each interaction between citizens and authority, each subtle expression of distrust or fear, each moment of potential conflict, they all represented opportunities for the kind of change the program promised. I'm calling Judge Vasquez this morning, he announced as they settled into their vehicle. I'm accepting the position. Anna nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. I know. You decided the moment you started reading that folder, didn't you? You just needed time to admit it to yourself. The patrol car's radio crackled to life, dispatching them to their first call of the day. As Thomas navigated through morning traffic, he felt a new sense of purpose settling over him. Today's shift would be different, not because the situations would change, but because his perspective had. Partner, Anna said as they approached their first scene, whatever happens with this program, I've got your back. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't lose this clarity. Don't let the system pull you back into old habits. The Thomas Rodriguez who spent last night confronting his biases and questioning his assumptions, that's the partner I want watching my back. Thomas parked the car, taking a moment to appreciate the weight of her words. I promise. And Anna, thanks for seeing the potential for change in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. They stepped out into the morning sun, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring. But for the first time in 15 years, Thomas felt like he was truly serving his community rather than just policing it. The real work, the hard work of transformation, was just beginning. The radio crackled again with another call, but this time Thomas approached it with new eyes, ready to put into practice the insights of his sleepless night. Each interaction would be an opportunity to demonstrate a different kind of policing, to show his colleagues that change was possible, necessary, and long overdue. The call was deceptively routine, a dispute at a local market in one of the city's working-class neighborhoods. As Thomas and Anna approached the scene, he consciously checked his usual impulses. Instead of bursting in with authority on display, he took a moment to observe, to understand. The market owner, an elderly man with weathered hands and tired eyes, was gesturing animatedly at a young man in worn clothes. A small crowd had gathered, their phones already out, ready to capture any hint of police misconduct. Thomas felt their eyes on him, heavy with expectation and history. Let me take point on this one, Thomas said to Anna, who nodded with understanding. This would be his first test of implementing the principles he'd spent the night studying. He approached slowly, hands visible, body language deliberately open. Good morning, he called out in a clear but non-threatening voice. I'm Officer Rodriguez. Before anyone tells me what happened, I'd just like to know if everyone is safe. The question seemed to catch both parties off guard. They'd clearly been expecting the usual authoritative demands for identification and immediate compliance. The elderly shop owner lowered his accusatory finger, while the young man's defensive posture eased slightly. He's trying to accuse me of stealing, the young man burst out, his voice carrying the edge of someone used to not being heard. But I have a receipt. In the past, Thomas might have immediately sided with the business owner, might have aggressively demanded the young man's documents. Instead, he maintained his calm demeanor. May I see the receipt? The young man's ND shook slightly as he pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. Thomas noticed the calluses on his fingers, the paint stains on his clothes, signs of honest labor that he might have overlooked before. While Anna spoke with the shop owner, Thomas carefully examined the receipt. There was indeed a discrepancy, a pricing error that had led to the misunderstanding. Instead of immediately declaring who was right or wrong, he brought both parties together. Senors, I think I understand what happened here, he began, his voice measured and respectful. "There seems to be a confusion about the pricing. Rather than assign blame, perhaps we could discuss how to resolve this in a way that works for everyone." The crowd watched, phones still recording, as Thomas facilitated a conversation between the two men. The shop owner, realizing the error in his computer system, apologized for the accusation. The young man, treated with respect and dignity, accepted the apology and even offered to help identify other items that might be incorrectly priced. As they returned to their patrol car, Anna gave him an approving nod. "That was different. Good different." "It felt different," Thomas admitted, settling behind the wheel. "In the past, I probably would have just ordered everyone to move along, maybe run the kids' documents just because I could. But actually listening, actually seeing them as people, that's what the program's about, isn't it?" Anna said. "Not just changing procedures, but changing perspectives." The rest of their shift continued in this vein. Each call became an opportunity to practice the principles from Judge Vasquez's program. A domestic disturbance was handled with patience and empathy rather than immediate force. A group of teenagers loitering outside a shop were engaged in conversation rather than immediately dispersed. By afternoon, word had spread through the precinct about Thomas's changed approach. Some officers watched him with skepticism, others with curiosity. During their lunch break, several younger officers approached their car, asking questions about the situations they'd handled. "The thing is," Thomas found himself explaining to a rookie who'd been particularly interested, "we've been trained to see every situation as a potential threat, every citizen as a potential criminal. But what if we started seeing them as potential allies in keeping our communities safe?" The rookie's expression showed the same mix of doubt and hope that Thomas had felt while reading through the program materials. "But what about officer safety? We can't let our guard down completely." "Being respectful doesn't mean being careless," Anna interjected. "If anything, treating people with dignity makes our job safer. When communities trust us, they're more likely to cooperate, more likely to help prevent crimes before they happen." As the afternoon wore on, Thomas's phone buzzed with a message from Judge Vasquez. "How about we make it official? 3 p.m. tomorrow." He showed the message to Anna, who smiled. "Ready to change the world, partner?" "One interaction at a time," Thomas replied, starting the car for their next call. "One officer at a time." The rest of their shift passed with a new energy. Each interaction became a chance to demonstrate a different kind of policing, to show both citizens and fellow officers that authority could be exercised with respect, that power could be used to elevate rather than intimidate. By the time they returned to the precinct, Thomas had accumulated a small but significant collection of positive interactions, moments where potential confrontations had been defused, where citizens had expressed genuine gratitude, where fellow officers had witnessed a different approach yielding better results. As they completed their paperwork, Officer Santos, one of the department's most traditional veterans, stopped by their desks. "Heard about what you did at the market this morning," he said, his expression unreadable. "Thought you were going soft after that thing with the judge." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Not soft, Santos. Just smarter. More effective." "Maybe," Santos conceded, surprising both Thomas and Anna. "Had a similar situation last week that ended with 2 arrests and a lot of paperwork. Your way." He paused, considering, "Might be worth looking into." After Santos left, Anna turned to Thomas with raised eyebrows. "If you're getting through to Santos, maybe this program really can work." Thomas nodded, finishing his report. The day's events had confirmed what his night of reflection had suggested. Change was possible, necessary, and perhaps more welcome than he'd imagined. Tomorrow, he would officially accept Judge Vasquez's offer, but today had already marked the beginning of his transformation. As they walked to their cars at shift's end, the setting sun painted the precinct in warm colors, suggesting the possibility of new beginnings. Other officers were arriving for the night shift, and Thomas noticed how some of them watched him with newfound interest rather than the previous day's hostility. "You know," Anna said as they reached their vehicles, "today felt like what I always imagined policing should be. Not just enforcing laws, but building trust, solving problems, making a real difference in people's lives." Thomas looked back at the precinct building, thinking about how much had changed in just 24 hours. "That's what we're going to teach them, Anna. That's what this program can do, show officers there's a better way, a more effective way. One interaction at a time, she repeated his earlier words with a smile. One officer at a time. He completed the thought, unlocking his car. The drive home felt different from the previous evening. Instead of doubt and uncertainty, Thomas felt a growing sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but today had shown him that change was not only possible, but transformative. His phone buzzed one more time. A message from Judge Vasquez. Heard good things about your shift today. Looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. Thomas smiled, realizing that this was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead, not just changing his own approach, but helping others see the possibility and necessity of transformation. But after today, he knew it was possible. One interaction, one officer, one day at a time. That evening, Thomas spent hours preparing for his meeting with Judge Vasquez. He meticulously documented every interaction from his shift, analyzing how his new approach had differed from his old habits. His kitchen table became a workspace covered with notes, observations, and ideas for the training program. The experiences of the day had crystallized something in his mind. This wasn't just about changing procedures or implementing new protocols. It was about fundamentally transforming the relationship between law enforcement and the community. Each positive interaction from today's shift had revealed the potential impact of this new approach. Around midnight, his phone lit up with a text from Anna. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about today. Remember that teenager at the market? His mother called the precinct to thank us. Said it was the first time she'd seen her son treated with respect by police. Thomas stared at the message, letting its significance sink in. One interaction, one small change in approach had already begun to shift perceptions. He thought about all the similar situations he'd handled differently over the years, wondering how many opportunities for building trust he'd missed. He began drafting a framework for what would become his contribution to the training program. Day 1 Field Observations. Initial approach. Body language matters more than words. Tone sets the entire trajectory of interaction. Asking about safety before demand shows genuine concern. Active listening lets citizens tell their story without interruption. Watch for nonverbal cues. Acknowledge emotions without judgment. De-escalation through respect. Treat every person as a potential ally. Explain processes and decisions. Offer solutions rather than just enforcement. The list grew as he recalled more details from the day's interactions. Each point represented a departure from traditional policing methods, yet each had proven more effective than the old approach of immediate authority and control. Around 2 a.m., unable to sleep, he drove through his patrol area, seeing the neighborhoods through new eyes. The late-night food vendors, the security guards at apartment buildings, the young people hanging out in parks. All were part of the community fabric he'd sworn to protect, not potential threats to be controlled. He parked near the market where the morning's interaction had occurred. The area was quiet now, but he could still see the scene playing out in his mind. How many similar situations across the city tonight were being handled the old way? How many officers were missing opportunities to build trust rather than fear? His phone buzzed again, another message from Anna. Just got word from night shift. Santos actually tried your approach on a noise complaint call. Said it worked better than expected. You're already making waves, partner. The news sent a surge of hope through him. If someone like Santos, old school, set in his ways, could see the value in this new approach, maybe the resistance to change wasn't as insurmountable as it seemed. Dawn was breaking when Thomas finally returned home. He had just a few hours before his meeting with Judge Vasquez, but sleep seemed impossible. Instead, he began organizing his thoughts into a formal presentation, something that could help other officers see what he was beginning to understand. He wrote about the teenager at the market, about Santos's tentative acceptance, about the mother's grateful phone call. Each small victory from the previous day became a case study in the possibility of change. At 7 a.m., his doorbell rang unexpectedly. Anna stood there, holding coffee and pastries, her expression determined. Thought you might need backup for today's meeting, she said, pushing past him into the kitchen. She stopped short at the sight of his notes spread across every surface. Been busy, I see. Couldn't sleep, Thomas admitted, gratefully accepting the coffee. Keep thinking about how to make this work on a larger scale. Anna picked up one of his papers, scanning his notes. "This is good, Thomas. Really good. You're not just documenting procedures. You're capturing the mindset shift that makes them work." They spent the next hour refining his presentation and his practical experience, helping to ground his theoretical framework in reality. She pointed out potential obstacles, suggested ways to address resistance, and added her own observations about what made the new approach effective. "You know what's really different?" she said, highlighting a particular section of his notes. "Yesterday, for the first time in years, I saw you actually looking at people, not just assessing threats or looking for violations, but really seeing them as human beings." The observation struck home. Thomas remembered Judge Vasquez's words about being part of the solution rather than just another example of the problem. Yesterday had shown him what that could look like in practice. As the hour of his meeting approached, Thomas gathered his materials with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Anna insisted on driving him to the courthouse, using the time to help him prepare for potential questions. The courthouse looked different in the morning light, less imposing, more like a place of possibility than judgment. As they pulled up to the entrance, Anna grabbed his arm. "Remember something, partner," she said seriously. What we're doing, it's not just about saving your career anymore. It's about saving the soul of our profession." Thomas nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. But unlike the burden of his old approaches, this weight felt purposeful, meaningful. The security guards at the courthouse entrance recognized him from his years of testifying in cases. Today, though, he made a point of greeting them by name, asking about their families, the kind of simple human interaction he'd learned to appreciate in the past 24 hours. As he rode the elevator to Judge Vasquez's chambers, Thomas reflected on how much had changed since his last visit. He was no longer the defensive officer expecting punishment. He was a man with a mission, carrying not just his own experiences, but the potential for systemic change. The judge's assistant greeted him with more warmth than yesterday, perhaps having heard about his transformed approach to policing. As he waited to be called in, Thomas reviewed his notes one final time, knowing that what he was about to propose went far beyond the original scope of the judge's program. His phone buzzed one last time, a message from Anna. "Remember, you're not just representing yourself anymore. You're representing every officer who wants to do better but doesn't know how." The assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Judge Vasquez will see you now." Thomas gathered his materials and stood, ready to take the next step in what he now understood was more than just a career change. It was the beginning of a movement. As he reached for the door handle, he silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led him to stop Judge Vasquez's car that day, setting in motion a chain of events that would transform not just his approach to policing, but potentially the entire department's relationship with the community it served. Behind that door waited not just Judge Vasquez, but the opportunity to turn yesterday's small victories into lasting change. Thomas straightened his shoulders, gripped his folder of notes and observations, and prepared to present his vision for a new kind of policing. One interaction, one officer, one day at a time. The heavy wooden door opened, and Thomas stepped forward into what he now knew was not an ending, but a beginning.